Don't touch that picture, my husband snapped as I reached for my father's framed photograph at the funeral reception. You deserve nothing from this family. Every conversation stopped. Even the sound of silverware against plates disappeared. Then I heard someone whisper behind me, "The lawyer just arrived." At that moment I realized my worst day was about to become something none of us could have imagined. My name is Rachel Bennett and I'm 36 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio, where I've spent the last 12 years teaching English at a public middle school. My students always said I had endless patience. I believed kindness could solve almost anything. Looking back, I think that belief kept me trapped for far too long. I wasn't rich. I never drove a fancy car or wore expensive clothes. My husband often joked that teachers worked twice as hard for half the money, and although everyone laughed, I always felt the sting behind those words. I married Daniel 11 years before the day everything changed. In the beginning he was charming, supportive, and funny. He used to leave little notes in my lunch bag that said, "I'm proud of you." Somewhere along the way those notes disappeared. His compliments slowly turned into criticism. His encouragement became control. The change happened gradually after my father became sick. Dad was a quiet man. He wasn't the type to make long speeches or show his emotions openly. Instead, he fixed broken fences without being asked. He shoveled snow from my driveway before I woke up. When my car needed repairs, he somehow already had the tools ready before I even called him. That was how he showed love. As his health declined, I visited him almost every evening after school. We'd sit in his kitchen drinking weak coffee while the smell of old wood and fresh bread filled the room. Sometimes we barely spoke. We didn't have to. Daniel hated those visits. "You're wasting every evening over there," he'd complain. "He's my father." "He's sick, Rachel. Your brother's handling everything." That wasn't true. My younger brother, Kevin, worked in Dad's small construction company, and because of that, everyone treated him like he carried the entire family on his shoulders. He was the one they always praised. Every family dinner became another chance to celebrate Kevin's latest project while my teaching career was politely ignored. "Oh, Rachel still teaches," someone would say. Then the conversation always moved back to Kevin. I told myself it didn't matter. I wanted peace more than recognition. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. Even when Daniel rolled his eyes every time I drove to Dad's house, I stayed quiet. Even when relatives joked that teachers never understood real money, I smiled anyway. Even when I felt invisible sitting at my own family table, I convinced myself it wasn't worth arguing. Because keeping the peace seemed easier than fighting for respect. What I didn't understand was that people who benefit from your silence eventually expect it. My father saw more than he ever admitted. One evening, while I was washing the dishes in his kitchen, he quietly said, "Don't let anyone tell you your kindness makes you weak." I smiled. "I'll be fine, Dad." He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I hope so." Those words stayed with me. When he passed away a few months later, it felt like the strongest person in my life had simply disappeared. I thought the funeral would be a day for grief. Instead, it became the day my marriage truly ended. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. I just didn't know yet how important that would become. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to say something. If you've ever been overlooked because of your job, your personality, or because you were the quiet one in the family, you're not alone. If you've ever stayed silent just to keep everyone else happy, I understand exactly how that feels. Subscribe if stories like this speak to you, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been underestimated. Don't forget to leave a like and click hype. Now let me tell you what happened after my father's funeral. The service ended just after noon. Family members slowly gathered in the reception hall next door. Long tables were covered with simple white cloths, bowls of salad, sandwiches, and coffee that had already started to grow cold. People hugged each other. Some cried. Others whispered about memories of Dad. Daniel wasn't interested in any of that. Before anyone had even finished filling their plates, he leaned toward Kevin and said loudly enough for several relatives to hear, "We should settle the property before people start getting ideas." I stared at him. "Daniel," I whispered, "can we please not do this today?" He didn't even look at me. Kevin chuckled. "She's always been too emotional for business." A few cousins laughed nervously. I felt my face burn. "I didn't come here to talk about money," I said. Kevin shrugged. "That's easy to say when you never helped build anything." Daniel nodded. "Exactly." Then he looked straight at me. You deserve nothing. Your father knew who actually earned it. The room went silent. I turned toward my mother, hoping she'd say something. Anything. She lowered her eyes and kept stirring her untouched coffee. That hurt more than Daniel's words. A few minutes later, the pastor asked if anyone wanted to share memories of Dad. I stood. Dad had personally asked me months earlier to read a letter he had written if he didn't recover. Before I could reach the front of the room, Daniel grabbed my arm. Sit down. He wanted me to read something. Kevin stepped between us. We've already decided I'll speak. You decided, I answered quietly. Neither of them moved. The pastor looked uncomfortable but didn't interfere. So I sat back down. I folded Dad's letter inside my purse without opening it. That moment broke something inside me. After lunch, Daniel pulled me aside near the hallway. We should handle paperwork today while everyone's together. He held out several documents. Just sign here. It'll make everything easier. I looked at the pages. There were property forms, transfer requests, financial authorizations. I've never seen these before, I said. You don't need to read every line. I do. He sighed dramatically. Rachel, stop making everything difficult. I'll read them first. His smile disappeared. Kevin walked over. Still refusing to help? I'm refusing to sign papers I don't understand. Several relatives pretended not to listen while clearly listening to every word. Nobody defended me. Nobody asked why I was being pressured only hours after burying my father. I folded the papers and handed them back. No. Daniel's jaw tightened. You'll regret making this harder than it has to be. Before I could answer, the main doors opened. An elderly man in a dark gray suit stepped inside carrying a thick sealed folder. Everyone recognized him immediately. It was my father's attorney. He walked calmly to the center of the room and cleared his throat. I apologize for arriving late. His voice was steady. Before anyone makes decisions regarding Mr. Bennett's estate, I have instructions. He lifted the heavy folder. Your father left a 17-page will, along with additional documents that must be read tomorrow morning in my office. Every immediate family member is required to attend. For the first time all day, Kevin stopped smiling. Daniel slowly lowered the papers in his hand. The lawyer looked around the room one final time. And I strongly advise that nobody signs anything until every page has been read. The silence that followed felt heavier than the funeral itself. The next morning should have been simple. Instead, it became another lesson in how quickly people reveal who they really are when they think money is involved. I woke before sunrise after barely sleeping. My phone buzzed with messages, but none of them were from my family. I opened the family group chat anyway. There were dozens of new messages. I couldn't read a single one. I had been removed sometime during the night. I stared at the screen for several seconds. No explanation. No phone call. No apology. Just gone. I almost laughed because it was such a small thing compared to everything else, yet it hurt more than I expected. They didn't just want my father's belongings. They wanted to erase me from every conversation. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, I held up my phone. You knew about this? He poured himself coffee without looking at me. It was Kevin's idea. And you agreed? It keeps things simpler. Simpler for who? For everyone. I looked at him, hoping to find even a little guilt. There was none. You've become impossible to talk to, he said. No, I answered quietly. I've finally started asking questions. He left without another word. That afternoon, my aunt invited everyone to dinner before the official reading of the will. Everyone. Or at least almost everyone. I only found out because my cousin Emma called me. I thought you were coming. I wasn't invited. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, Rachel. It's okay. But it wasn't. Emma insisted I come anyway. When I arrived, conversations stopped for a second before awkward smiles appeared. Nobody expected me to walk through that door. I took an empty chair near the end of the table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room, but I had no appetite. Kevin raised his glass. I guess Rachel finally found the address. A few people laughed. Daniel smiled. I told you she'd show up eventually. I ignored them and began eating quietly. Then Daniel looked around the table. You know what amazes me? Nobody answered. Rachel still thinks teaching middle school is some great accomplishment. Someone chuckled. He continued. She's the only person here who still needs saving. More laughter. Not loud. Just enough. Enough to let me know nobody planned to defend me. I set my fork down. I love my job. Daniel shrugged. Love doesn't pay bills. It pays my bills. Barely. Kevin leaned back in his chair. If Dad had invested in you instead of the business, we'd all be broke. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Even people who didn't agree said nothing. I stood. I'm going home. Daniel didn't stop me. Neither did anyone else. Outside, the cool evening air felt easier to breathe than that dining room. I sat in my car and cried for exactly 5 minutes. Then I wiped my face. Something inside me had changed. For years I believed silence kept families together. Now I understood something different. Silence only protected the people causing the pain. The next betrayal came 2 days later. I stopped by my father's house to collect a few family photographs before the legal meeting. Kevin's truck was already parked outside. Through the living room window, I saw him and Daniel spreading papers across Dad's dining table. I used my spare key and walked inside. What are you doing? Both men jumped. Nothing, Daniel answered too quickly. Kevin immediately gathered the papers. I noticed one page lying on the floor. My name caught my eye. I picked it up. At the bottom was a signature line. Rachel Bennett. Like. Above it were words authorizing property transfers. I looked at Daniel. What is this? You weren't supposed to see that. I asked what it is. Kevin stepped closer. It's just a draft. A draft with my name on it? We're preparing paperwork. For what? Daniel folded his arms. You're making everything harder than it needs to be. I haven't signed anything. You will. No. His voice became sharp. You don't understand business. And apparently you don't understand the word no. For several long seconds nobody spoke. Then Kevin quietly took the paper from my hand. You always think the worst. No, I replied. I've finally started seeing the truth. I walked out before either of them could stop me. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation from the past year. Every strange comment. Every time Daniel insisted on handling paperwork. Every moment someone told me not to worry. None of it felt innocent anymore. I opened a storage box I'd brought home from my father's house months earlier. Inside were folders, notebooks, and receipts I'd promised to organize for him during his illness. Back then I thought I was simply helping an aging father keep his records neat. Now I wondered if he'd trusted me with something much bigger. As I sorted through the files, memories returned. Dad had watched me carefully one evening. If anything happens to me, he'd said softly, don't throw these away. At the time I thought he was simply being sentimental. Now those words echoed differently. I stopped looking at myself as the woman everyone underestimated. I started looking at myself as the only person who might already have the answers. For the first time since the funeral I wasn't afraid. I was paying attention. And this time I wasn't going to stay quiet. I barely slept the night before the will reading. Instead of lying awake in fear, I spread every folder across my dining room table. Page after page told a story I had ignored for too long. While Dad was sick, he often asked me to organize old business records because he said my classroom habits made me patient and careful. I know you'll keep everything in order, he used to say. I never questioned why he wanted me to scan every invoice, every bank statement, and every contract. Now I understood. Hidden among those papers were emails showing payments that didn't match invoices. There were copies of checks with altered amounts. There were signatures that looked almost right until I compared them with the originals. One folder made my hands shake. Inside was a handwritten note from Dad. Rachel, if you're reading this after I'm gone, don't destroy any of these records. If people do the right thing, they'll never matter. If they don't, you'll know what to do. I sat quietly for a long time. He had known. Not every detail perhaps, but enough to worry. I scanned every document into secure cloud storage months earlier because Dad feared paper records could be lost in a fire. Without realizing it, I had protected every piece of evidence. I called Mr. Howard, my father's attorney. He answered immediately. I've been hoping you'd call. I found the files. I thought you might. There are things here that don't make sense. I know, he replied calmly. Bring everything tomorrow. And Rachel? Yes. Don't sign a single piece of paper until every page of your father's will has been read. The next morning I walked into his office carrying one small box. Daniel smiled when he saw me. "You finally came to your senses?" "No," I answered. "I came prepared." Kevin leaned back confidently. "This shouldn't take long." Mother sat quietly in the corner, twisting a tissue in her hands. Mr. Howard entered carrying the thick folder we'd seen at the funeral. He looked around the conference room. "Before we begin, everyone will remain seated until the reading is complete." Nobody argued. He opened the first page. For nearly an hour he carefully read all 17 handwritten pages. Dad wrote about his childhood. He thanked friends. He thanked employees who had stood beside him for decades. Then he wrote about me. "To my daughter Rachel. You always believed kindness was weakness because other people treated it that way. I never did." I felt tears filling my eyes. "You cared for me without asking for recognition. You listened when others rushed. You earned my trust through quiet actions." Daniel shifted in his chair. Kevin crossed his arms. Mr. Howard continued reading. Dad explained why he had asked me to organize company records during his illness. He wrote that he had noticed financial inconsistencies but wanted everything documented before making accusations. The room suddenly became very still. Daniel interrupted. "This has nothing to do with the estate." Mr. Howard looked up. "It has everything to do with the estate." He reached for another folder. "The will instructs me to review supporting documentation if any dispute arises." Kevin laughed nervously. "There won't be any dispute." Mr. Howard calmly turned toward me. "Rachel." I slid the storage box across the table. He opened it and removed several folders. One by one he placed printed emails, bank transfers, invoices and signature comparisons before everyone. Daniel's confidence disappeared. Kevin leaned forward. "What is this?" "The records your father asked Rachel to preserve." Daniel shook his head. "Those papers prove nothing." Mr. Howard calmly placed another document beside them. "This forensic review was completed last month." He continued. "It confirms multiple altered invoices and unauthorized attempts to prepare estate transfer documents before the will was read." Kevin's face turned pale. "That's impossible." "No," Mr. Howard replied. "It's documented." Daniel pointed toward me. "She made all this up." I finally spoke. "No. I simply kept the records you thought nobody would ever read." He slammed his hand against the table. "You've been spying on us." "I was caring for my father." Kevin tried again. "Rachel misunderstood everything." I looked directly at him. "Then explain why property transfer forms with my unsigned name were already prepared before Dad's funeral was over." Neither of them answered. Mr. Howard quietly placed those same draft documents onto the table. "I received anonymous copies several days ago," he said. "I've already notified the appropriate authorities because the circumstances required legal review." Daniel stared at him. "You called the authorities?" "My responsibility is to my client's wishes." The room fell silent. Mother covered her face and began crying. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." I believed she hadn't known everything, but she had known enough to stay silent. That silence had cost all of us. Daniel looked at me one last time. "You planned this?" I shook my head. "No. My father planned to protect the truth. I simply respected his wishes." Nobody spoke after that. The confidence that had carried Daniel and Kevin into that office had completely vanished. For years they believed my kindness meant I would never stand up for myself. They had mistaken patience for weakness. They were wrong. In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce. It wasn't easy. Ending 11 years of marriage never is. But every signature I placed on those papers felt lighter than the silence I had carried for so long. The estate was settled according to my father's wishes. The legal investigation into the altered documents continued without my involvement. I didn't celebrate. I didn't seek revenge. I simply walked away. I returned to my classroom a few weeks later. The sound of students laughing in the hallway reminded me that life keeps moving even after heartbreak. One afternoon, a student stayed behind after class. "I don't think I'm good enough," she admitted. I smiled because I knew that feeling. "You don't need everyone to believe in you," I told her. "You just need to stop believing the people who don't." As she left, I realized I had finally taken my own advice. My father's greatest gift wasn't a house or money. It wasn't written inside 17 pages of legal language. The greatest inheritance my father left me wasn't written on paper. It was the courage to stop accepting less than I deserved. If someone in your own family has ever betrayed your trust over money, property, or an inheritance, I want you to know you're not alone. Subscribe if stories like mine remind you that truth still matters. Share your own experience in the comments because your story could help someone else feel less alone. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially when the people hurting you are the ones you loved most. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and become part of our community. Tell me where you're watching from because I love seeing how far these stories travel. Click hype if Rachel's journey encouraged you, and remember that I read every comment. Your voice matters.